curious.
Those who can imagine anything can create the impossible.
I've got a little postcard which links to the QR code.
Exactly.
I'll send
So
it to
then,
you after.
like me, I'm answering what I think about that.
And
Then
how are you keeping?
Mario Draghi report, letter report, which is very
Get started. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed panelists, it's a pleasure to welcome you all at this important session at Mobile World Congress Barcelona 2025 for having a discussion that sits at the heart of the digital economy. Who should be financing the networks and how do we sustain those investments? Colleagues, we live in an era of explosive digital growth. Connectivity has become a fundamental as electricity and clean water, enabling all the new digital services such as AI, cloud computing, streaming, IoT, and the metaverse. Reliable high-speed internet is an absolute necessity. It is not a must to have, it's a necessity for economic participation, healthcare, education, and innovation. Yet the investment required to sustain this demand is outpacing traditional funding models. The numbers speak for themselves. The global IP traffic is expected to surpass 400 exabytes per month by the end of 2025. Streaming services alone account for over 60% of internet traffic in many regions. AI and cloud-based applications are consuming unprecedented amount of bandwidth and computational power. The backbone of this entire digital revolution is telecom infrastructure, meaning fiber optics, mobile network, and also satellite. But the cost of building and maintaining this infrastructure falls disproportionately on telecom operators. Now, what challenge are we facing today? And I would like to set the stage for that. We all know that the demand for data is skyrocketing. We are in a global economy and we will be facing tsunami of data on our network. Video streaming, as I mentioned, cloud, AI, IoT, exponential growth in the network. Yet the investment required to sustain this level of demand is outpacing the funding model, and we estimate that was made about a couple of years ago, $450 billion to bridge the digital divide. Africa itself alone requires $108 billion. Telecom operators are investing billions every year in the next generation of networks, spectrum licensing, fiber expansion, and their revenue is stagnating. The market is shifting. The revenue per user is declining, squeezed by the competition and price pressure. The cost of 5G, 5.5G or 5G advanced rollout and fiber expansion is increasing, while at the same time, operators are facing regulatory burden. Meanwhile, big tech, OTTs, digital platform, cloud provider, content aggregator are thriving, generating immense revenues from internet connectivity without directly contributing to the infrastructure costs. This is not just a financial issue in our industry, it's a question of sustainability, fairness, and the long-term viability of the global connectivity. It raised a number of questions, and we will address these questions today. Should the largest beneficiaries of network infrastructure contribute to its sustainability? Now, The debate that we've been having over almost the past 15 years, we have two approaches. On one hand, telecom operators argue. What's the argument? The traffic burden is asymmetrical. A fair contribution is needed. Regulatory precedent exists. Without sustainable investment, the digital economy itself is at risk. That's on the MNO's part. On the big tech companies, they argue as well that they are already investing in connectivity through subsea cable, cloud-based infrastructure, and edge computing. They claim that network operators benefit from the very traffic from their platform. Forcing additional contribution could also stifle innovation and set a dangerous precedent for the digital economy. Now, are we going to face a shift in the horizon? And this is not just a European Union debate, and we have a commissioner with us, but it's a global debate. And I will, based on the discussion, provide you some examples of best practices in a few countries in the world. Now, as I mentioned, it raised a number of questions. Is the current telecom financing model sustainable? Should the digital platform contribute? Would be a fair contribution model create unintended consequences? Is there any other alternative model? And how can we ensure that infrastructure investment keep pace with the demand which is growing in the digital economy? And finally, the role of the government. What should be the role of the government? So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to address all these points with our esteemed colleague today. And this question must be addressed if we want to ensure a sustainable, inclusive, and innovative digital future. And to help us unpack that complexity, we are joined by an exceptional panel of experts. Each of them will be bringing deep insights and unique viewpoints from their industry. I would like to welcome Mr. Shahid Ahmed, who is the Executive Vice President at NTT, and also from time to time advisor to the US FCC. Shahid, if you can raise your hand, we can identify you. I'd like also to welcome Ms. Laura Ballarin-Cerezza, member of the European Parliament on my left. Mr. Ben Reschner, chair of the GSMA Policy Group in Europe, and chief economist also and head of public affairs at Vodafone Group. And finally, my good friend, Dennis O'Brien, chairman of Digicel. Let's give them a round of applause. Don't be shy. I want you to motivate them and encourage them. And I'd like to start with Shahid. Shahid, based on the framing of the debate that I have just elaborated, I'd like to hear from your perspective. We've seen the two approaches. We are in 2025, debating about it for the last 15 years. Where are we today? What's your opinion from an entity perspective?
Thanks, Bokhar. Look, in the end, what Mario Draghi proposed in his proposal around fairness of telecom, two principles stood out for me. Number one is that you can no longer view competitiveness of a market based on price point alone. It has to be judged based on their innovation and their products and services that the company offers. To me, that's how you gain fairness in the marketplace. The second thing that Mario talked about was specifically around how open up the regulatory framework so companies can merge and partner together to offer better services at a very economical price. So it allows them to do more investment, add more bandwidth and coverage. And to me, I think that is the two tenets that will allow telecom carriers to be able to justify more capital expansion, as well as providing better services to consumers. I think putting a tax on the tech companies, which is one of the proposals out there. I'm not quite clear and sure that the tech companies themselves are going to be adopting that proposal, mainly because they offer services directly to consumers, and adding a tax on top of that will increase prices, and consumers will be very unhappy. So yeah, I prefer the two principles around stop looking at pricing alone, look at the innovation and product and services, as well as opening up the regulatory framework for companies to freely partner together.
From your understanding, the report from Mario Draghi is a recommendation for discussion or recommendation to the government for implementation? Because you mentioned, I am not sure that the tech company will be ready to pay. So is it a subject for debate? It means, behind my question, are we restarting from zero again? And for the moment, most of the telco providers with whom I'm discussing, they are exhausted. And we are widening the digital divide by not connecting the unconnected. So if this is something to be discussed today at an early stage, it means we still have the same problem for another decade. So my question is, your understanding about Draghi's recommendation, is it something to be discussed or to be implemented?
I think Laura could probably answer that question.
I will ask her other questions.
Succinctly, but I think it's a proposal. I don't think the tech companies like Netflix, Google, and others have truly adopted that. You have to ask them. But I do think that putting a tax burden on those over-the-top companies will impact the consumers, and whether increasing prices or being able to provide better content is going to be yet to be seen.
And in the US market with the FCC, have you heard about any feedback on that, on those recommendations? I would like to feel the perception from a US perspective. Is it something that they want to work on, to discuss?
Yeah.
If you have any information to share with us, of course.
So in US, we have this policy called Universal Service Funds. Some of you might know, it's USF. So
Universal Service Fund.
Exactly. So if you ever look at your bill from AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, you'll see a line item called USF, and that's basically a fund required by the government so that we can expand services to rural areas, schools, and other populations that don't adequately receive broadband speeds, or for that matter, coverage. And that vehicle is there, has been there for the last 20 plus years.
I'd like to come back on the USF, but we'll discuss it with Dennis later. Let me turn to Laura as a member of the European Parliament. Laura, let me ask you differently the same question that I have asked to Shahid. Where do you stand on this debate from the Parliament perspective, and how can we ensure that a balanced, future-proof digital system benefits all the stakeholders? I would like to center the discussion around what telecom operators are calling customer and government are calling consumer or citizen. It's the same individual. So what's your perspective around the benefits for the consumer from the European Parliament?
Thank you so much, Mr. Ba, and also thank you to the organizers, and welcome to Barcelona, which is my city. Unfortunately, not the best weather, but it's a pleasure hosting you all here this week with this amazing, in this amazing occasion. So, from the European perspective, European institutions, you know that last year in 2024 we have been working on the analysis and reflections. We had the white paper from the European Commission, the letter report, and the Draghi report. So we consider 2024 as a year of reflection, and we think that 2025 should be the year of action in many digital aspects. In relation with your question, first of all, and completing a bit your context and your data that you pose, it's true that data trafficking is skyrocketing at 35% annually, while EU telecom market capitalization has declined 41% in the last decade. So we see a clear imbalance between the digital infrastructure and the content providers, because we see that at world level, only 6 companies generate the 60% of the global internet traffic, which is a huge imbalance in relation with their contribution to the infrastructure costs. You have mentioned Draghi. Also here in Europe we see, and he is pointing that in the report, that around 200 billion euros are needed to meet the 2030 digital targets, which specifically is, for example, to reach the 100% coverage of fiber and 5G, in order that Europe doesn't lose the train of the digital revolution. So, and this comes the reflection on the fair share, which is, of course, a very polarized debate. And in my opinion, a more balanced ecosystem is needed. And or maybe it could be reasonable to look into a measured and market-driven approach that could involve voluntary agreements between content provider and network operators. In this way, the ones who benefit the most from the infrastructure could play a more active role in its expansion and its maintenance. We know that there are some other industries that are having these cooperative systems, and we have seen it in aviation industry, in the freight vehicles with the tolls. Well, you have mentioned that it's been many years discussing. Probably we should accelerate the discussion and find an agreement as soon as possible, because at least from the European side, we see that we need to take this a step further in order to close the digital gap. But I also think that we should envisage some other measures that the Commission has brought to the discussion, like the introduction of arbitration procedures, like the dispute resolution mechanism, that could bring a fair and efficient and transparent resolution if these agreements do not work, because we cannot be naive, and we know the obstacles and the resistance that the big techs will play. But beyond the matter of fees and contributions, which is very sensitive, also encouraging data efficiency measures like compression tech, optimized delivery methods, could be as well a complementary measure to reduce the network overload while maintaining the quality of the service. And we think that in the future Digital Networks Act, which is the piece of legislation that will come at the end of the year, all these discussions should be brought in order, and with in my point of view, with the ultimate objective not to punish or to give burden to the consumers. In my case, I consider them consumers because they deserve to pay
not to have counterproductive measures
exactly.
for the consumer.
That's true, that for consumers it's not only the price. So we don't want consumers to pay a higher price for the services, but we also know that they deserve quality services. And in this sense, we also need to take this into account to ensure the maintenance and expansion of the infrastructure. So I leave it here.
On this point, on the ubiquity of the services, I am referring to the digital single market. And based on, we have 2 reports, the Lita report and the Draghi report. Now, where on that, especially the Lita report, do we have any impact on the digital sovereignty, for example, for the single market?
Yeah, indeed. As you know, Lita report was analyzing the future of the single market, which just made 3 decades the last year, which is the backbone of the European project to ensure the 4 freedoms of movement of services, finances, people, and goods. And in this sense, we need to advance in order to close or to finish the digital single market, which still is to be achieved. And Leta talks about the need for regulatory harmonization, because we have now 27 markets in practice, which contributes to investment uncertainties. That's why we consider that we should work on advancement on this digital single market in order to reduce the EU intra barriers. Because now we are talking a lot about tariffs, and especially EU, US, but we know, and the report studies that there are EU intra barriers that create an extra burden, actually equivalent to a tariff of 44% for goods and 110% of services. So in this sense, and he poses something on the table that the European Commission will work on, it's the regime 28. I don't know if you heard about that, but in theory is this set of rules that could help to harmonize in some sectors.
Would help without harming or jeopardizing competitiveness.
Exactly.
In the leadership of Europe.
Yes. So in order to, knowing that we have 27 markets and 27 regulatory systems, because we are 27 states, in some sectors that we have seen that we need to scale up, and these 27 barriers are a clear obstacle, and in this sense, it's the tech startups is the very clear example. We should advance to have this digital regime 28 in order for them to work together, to do joint ventures, because now the barriers between member states are too high.
I'll come back on the second report. Let me, Ben, welcome. I'd like, and you have two hats, GSM Policy Group and also Vodafone, and you published recently a report. And if you can share with us and our esteemed audience, where that report that you have just published, and I'm inviting people to have a look, where this fair share debates fits in that report. If you can just elaborate before we go into a more detailed question.
Yeah, thank you, Baka, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, GSMA, for hosting this event. So, Baka, as you say, on Friday, we published a new report called Responsible Use of Networks, and I encourage all of you, please go Vodafone Responsible Use of Networks. And here I'm wearing my Vodafone hat, but to be honest, in the GSMA policy group, there's a lot of support for this report. And we published this report because we've lived for the last 2 years approximately in the debate around fair share. There's been information, to be honest, there's been misinformation, a lot of panic in some quarters, and we've tried to bring it back to the starting point and to actually explain why there's a problem in the first place that needs to be solved. And what we've done in this report is we've set out the problems for the telecoms industry in the context of the economic theory of tragedy of the commons. And if I won't go through all 40, 50 pages of the report now, you'll be pleased to know. But the tragedy of the commons is manifest in telecoms in that our networks are effectively treated as an infinite resource. And when they're treated as an infinite resource, there's no incentive to treat them with care and to look after them. And this manifests in this huge growth in traffic we see. But it's not just about content providers. Policymakers as well have treated our networks as an infinite resource, and to a certain extent they treated our sector as a sector with an infinite source of capital, notwithstanding what Laura just said about the market capitalization of the sector going down by 40% in the last 10 years. And when this plays out, when this tragedy of the commons manifests through our networks, the upshot is that in the end, this ecosystem, and I always hear the big tech companies talking about this symbiotic relationship between telco and tech, which is absolutely true. There is a symbiotic relationship. But this tragedy of the commons, the treating of our networks as infinitely able to expand, results in the ecosystem itself depleting, and in the worst case scenario, actually collapsing. And that is what we're trying to solve here.
When you say that, remember when I set the stage, I was talking about the argument from the MNO, and the argument from the big tech. So what you are saying now is not taking into account the fact that they are investing in CapEx, into cloud-based infrastructure.
So and the report does go into the levels of investment, but the level of investment in the last mile of telecoms infrastructure per unit of capacity is so overwhelmingly large compared to the investment needed for a unit of capacity in the core network and in the middle mile. And that's why you get this imbalance when there's no incentive to optimize traffic. The content provider can send 100 gig onto our network and it costs X, and we have to carry it, and it costs 150x, or whatever the number is. I'm not going to go into the exact numbers. And that's where this tragedy of the commons plays out. And what we find then is we have these ambitions, and I think everyone has a shared ambition, and this is part of the symbiotic relationship. We want to build the digital superhighways of the future. That is what our ambition is. That's what customers want. That's what consumers want and need. That's what businesses need. But we are spending all of our scarce capital, not our unlimited capital, if I'm using a road analogy, on fixing the potholes. We want to build superhighways and we're fixing the potholes.
You operate in many countries in the world. Now, what you are saying is valid for Europe or for the rest of the... Is it a universal reality or regional?
This is a universal reality. However, the tragedy manifests in different ways in different regions depending on the combination of power in the market, the policy positions. It can manifest very differently, and I'm sure Dennis will talk about the Caribbean, where it manifests in a very similar way. So it is, the principles are very general, but they won't play out exactly the same way, but they'll play out in a similar way wherever you are. And which is why we come to a proposal that we have, how to deal with this problem, and it's built on 3 pillars. And to be honest, they were the pillars that Laura referred to with a third pillar. So pillar number 1 is all about traffic optimization. There needs to be a framework in place, and we would say a code of conduct, to encourage and, if needed, mandate that operators are required to optimize their content in order to be appropriate to the medium in which it's carried. We do not need 8K content on a smartphone.
Code of
it makes
conduct
no sense.
framework discuss
It should
with
be
government,
yes,
different parties?
It would need to be within them. I think in order to avoid a free rider issue, it needs to be under the auspices of a regulator or a government. Pillar number 2 that we see as critical of the 3 pillars is looking carefully at net neutrality. Net neutrality in Europe, or open internet, was a regulation that was imposed about 10 years ago. It mainly, if we're perfectly honest, was implemented to stop us blocking Skype and over the top, that ship has sailed many, many years ago. But we're now in the position where we have an open internet regulation in Europe, which requires us to treat every megabyte or every gigabyte of traffic absolutely equally, which makes no sense when you have vastly different types of traffic being conveyed on networks. So policymakers need to think really carefully about what is the appropriate open internet regulation, because the principle is absolutely right, non-discrimination, treating everyone fairly, but that doesn't mean that every gigabyte of traffic needs to be treated in exactly the same way. There's no reason why an IoT bit of traffic needs to be treated in the same way as a mission-critical bit of traffic. It makes no sense. And then the third pillar of our 3-pillar run paper is that there should be a fair price paid for traffic conveyance services by the conveyors of content onto our networks. And we are a believer in the open market, market-based principles. That should be the subject of commercial negotiation. But given the starting point for where we are, and we are in commercial negotiation, and the difficulty of reaching commercial negotiations to getting to a solution, there needs to be a backdrop of regulatory arbitration in the event that those negotiations don't lead to a fair outcome. And that is how we see a fair and balanced approach to this topic. And the way we use language here is very important. We want to change the language from it's a fair share debate to actually a concept of shared responsibility. And if we have shared responsibility for ensuring that we can build the digital superhighways of tomorrow, I think we can move this debate forward in a fair and a symbiotic way.
When was this report published recently?
On Friday.
On Friday.
It's all about MWC.
Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to download this report and to have a look. Let me turn to Dennis. Dennis, you've championed this effort to get big tech, let's say, to pay for many, many years. Now, with all the effort that you have conducted over the past years, do you see any progress today, either on the implementation of your recommendation or on the discussion? So, what are the intentions today?
I think there's progress in the Caribbean for sure. We're really well organized because all the operators have come together, and we've made representations to all the prime ministers. The prime ministers of the Caribbean only 10 days ago said that they're setting up a working group led by the Prime Minister of Grenada, who's a very able person. And they are going to invite big tech to conversations
Move the mic.
with the governments of the Caribbean to set up a USF fund, which will fund fair share. So we're making real progress also in South America, particularly led by America Movil and Telefonica, a number of the operators, but also some of the regulators as well. I think Europe has been the big disappointment, to be honest with you. And when I read the Draghi report, you would be suicidal, because Europe needs reform from top to bottom, particularly in telecoms regulation. And if you look at what's happened in Europe, 190 billion of license fees and auction fees for spectrum, and more that's happening every year. There's 160, 170 operators, everybody's struggling, everybody's maybe has 1% or 2% growth. Their return on investment is 4%, and every mobile phone operator that's a public company, their share prices hit the ground. And the problem is that there's no willingness, and it's refreshing to hear from you, Laura, that you're interested in this area, but there's nobody wants to change it. Van der Leyen doesn't want to change it, and Europe is being left behind. Only 2 of the big tech companies come from Europe. And so I believe in the European project, but the European project is off the rails because of over-regulation. Let's be clear, that 4 operators are never going to build ubiquitous 5G or 6G coverage. They just can't afford it. Everybody is spending between 15 and 70% of their revenues on capital expenditure. It's not working. So Europe needs to tear up all its rules and start all over again and bring regulation across the 27 countries in a harmonized way where people will invest back in the industry. But if you step back and look at the industry today, we provide voice services, internet access, entertainment. Meta, WhatsApp do exactly the same, okay? They have nobody working in the Caribbean. We have 5,000 people. They pay no local taxes, no regulatory fees, and they have 70% of the traffic on our network today is them. In Trinidad today, 70% of voice traffic is WhatsApp.
But
So they are a species that are unregulated, untouched by anybody, okay, and they are competing for our customers.
One
So
of the recommendations now coming
Pardon?
up, one of the recommendations coming now is about taxation, as mentioned by Laura. So my perception is, for you, it's not enough. We need to go out of our way.
Absolutely. You see, the thing is this, now the Caribbean leaders, they recognize that this is, like, how can they tax us but not tax Meta? How can Meta have an ARPU of around $5 and we can have an ARPU of $8, but we're paying all these taxes, like 30-40% of revenue on regulation fees, spectrum fees and everything, and they don't have anything, okay? And this is how crazy the world is. These people are unregulated, okay? But they're making our industry uninvestable. And they're held by all these fools of regulators who think that they should charge more for spectrum, they should have auctions, and they should put up regulatory fees, and they should create problems for making investment. And that is the biggest problem that we have.
Are you happy about what has been done in South Korea, for example?
Well,
is
South
it,
Korea-
or in Peru, Internet para todos?
South Korea is the model where the government said to all the OTTs, come in here, lads, come on in here, sit around the table and start contributing to the network costs of SK Telecom and all the other operators in Korea. Now, they all tried to weasel and run for the airport, but they said, well, by the way, if you don't come in, there's going to be remedies against you. Now, I'm very enthusiastic about Brendan Carr as chairman of the SEC. Because the US has to lead here, okay? It's one of the good things that's coming out of the White House at the moment, is that there is going to be legislation in the House of Representatives and the Senate to bring USF legislation in, where all the OTTs are going to be forced to put money in to actually oil the machine that'll bring ubiquitous broadband, 5G, 6G, but give people an opportunity to enjoy the digital world.
Dennis, let me challenge you. We spoke about USF, It's very encouraging, but we've seen that USF in another region in Africa is not effective.
That's old USF though. Old USF was just a skip or a slush fund where the regulators just used to keep money and then they'd put all these crazy projects, fund them, like shocking projects. Okay, and that happened in Ireland, it happened in the Caribbean, it happened in Africa. But new USF is on steroids, okay? Because new USF is going to actually fund fair share. It's called conveniently USF, but it's really fair share. And I don't mind that. I'll drop the words fair share for USF any day of the week, providing these people who enjoy everything for nothing start to contribute to pay for the networks so that our industry can suddenly return investors' confidence as such and people can get a fair return on their capital. Everybody is looking for a fair return on capital employed, not a negative return. So, like, if I could also go into the horrors of what social media has created. And I think the Australians have something remarkable. They have banned children from being on social media until they're 16 years of age. Like, Zuckerberg is no better than the Sackler family in my mind. If you look at the hatred, it's an algorithm hatred, it's for criminals, it's for cyberbullying, and the mental health of children is being affected so badly. So I would say that the EU should ban social media for children up until the age of 16. The mental health problems we're going to see in the next 20 years are huge. And each
You have an EU commissioner on the stage.
Absolutely. So, you know, people, I don't know how we've sleepwalked into a situation where these people can actually pay no taxes to anybody, pay no regulatory fees, and then rip every operator off and take 70% of their capacity. It's an outrageous commercial proposition, and it needs to change. I'm sorry I'm so excited, Bokar, but this is a topic that we've all been working on for many years, but it has to change.
The feeling you are giving is that the big tech seems to be indifferent to the social and financial problem felt by the MNOs. That's the perception that you are giving. So it means that there is a bad willingness to contribute.
Yep.
And you call them the OTT, over the top. They call you the TTO, through the operator. So is it what you are saying?
Look, the MNOs, we've done a really bad job as an industry. The GSMA is only doing a better job, but they were having a sleep at the wheel. And it's, you know, Ben has done terrific work, you know, at the GSMA, at the policy side, but the leadership of the GSMA needs to take this debate forward and solve it for once and for all. It's the greatest opportunity that the GSMA have of reinventing itself, instead of being an event organizer like what this is, to having actually something worthy about their raison d'etre. And that is to make our industry viable again, so that all these wonderful technologies that we see here can be enjoyed by the consumer, because we're the conduit for that. And that's the way it should be, but you know, somebody has to pay the piper for the music and to build all the networks and to keep putting CapEx into better, stronger and more capacity networks.
I'll come back to that. If you allow me, colleagues, I would like to fill the room, and I will allow 1 or 2 questions from the floor. If there is anyone who wants to ask a question to our expert, I see one. Is there any second question? 2 questions. So we'll start, if you can introduce yourself. The gentleman, right? Yes. If you can. Yes, microphone is coming. But go to the point.
Chris
question.
Chris Alex, TBR. I think the telcos should be very careful what they wish for if they get this, because the hyperscalers can build networks, next generation networks, and go around the telcos. We see some of this today with Starlink, Project Kuiper, Google Fiber, Google Fi. There's a whole bunch of other examples. Be very careful how we do this.
Are you going to build in Haiti? Are you going to service customers in every country on a universal basis, though? I mean, that's the key thing here. Starlink can pick up business down in the Falklands Asuncion and other islands and Nauru in the Pacific, but they will not do ubiquitous coverage like all the other operators. And by the way, they're not even licensed. So, yes, there is that threat, but we've had that threat for the last 20 years and we've overcome that threat. But everybody should be licensed, everybody should pay fees, and everybody should pay taxes.
And I just want to build, so Boca, can I just build? Because as I said earlier, the hyperscalers are building out in the core networks in the middle mile. They're not going to the last mile because there's no money in it. Why would you go there right at this point in time? And yeah, sure, they can invest. But why would they invest in what at the moment is a business which is returning 4% on capital? They have far more data than, well, not more, but they have plenty of data.
Let's not have the debate here. I just wanted one question. John, second question, and
Yes.
we'll close the question.
John Strand, listen, they will invest in it. It's totally bullshit. The historical facts is, if they do it, their share price will plumb, okay? Because they have a high margin business, and then you invest a lot of money in a low margin business. That means that your margin will go down, your margin go down, the multiples on your share price will go down. Trust me, that's reality. That's basic. You don't need to be in business school in 2 days to understand that. So, very simple. Dennis, if I look at the Caribbean, we've done a lot of research.
John, very short.
Yes.
I still have 2 minutes.
But if I look at the Caribbean, because I think it's a fantastic case, there's an investment gap right now on a giant investment gap. The
$10 billion.
$10 billion. And the operators in the Caribbean invest about $2.2 billion, $2.3 billion a year. And if we look at the big tech companies, they have a cash flow in the Caribbean about $11.9 billion. They don't pay taxes, they don't employ any people. This sounds like this is the return of the old colonization of the Caribbean.
Well, it's colonialism of the 21st century.
Yes.
Like the Caribbean had slavery for 350 years, free labor and free produce and free land, which funded the whole of Europe and the wealth that was created in Europe. If you look at the British economy, everything started with slavery, same in Europe. So now we have a repeat of this with the tech colonialists. And it's the same in Africa. It's probably worse in Africa. In fact, it's appalling in Africa, Bokar.
We are coming to the end of the session, and I would like in 20 seconds, if there is any message you would like to share as a closing statement with our colleague, please. I'll start with Laura.
Thank you so much. I believe that at this point of the debate, we have a simple truth, which is that connectivity is not just about internet, it's about Europe's future, because we believe that we need to advance to have a digital infrastructure that would power AI, mobility, e-health, and specifically the new industrial wave. Because Draghi report was also saying that we need more connectivity in order to face the industrial wave that we are facing now. So it means ensuring that we advance towards a digital single market, breaking down the EU barriers in order to scale up the businesses and the consumers alike. So it's also important to work on an investment that will ensure our networks specifically to go in this path. And we think that the next Digital Networks Act would be an important piece of legislation that would take into account the both reports. Finally, I think that with the right policies, we can turn this challenge into an opportunity, especially from Europe, that we know that we are falling behind. So together, the lawmakers, the stakeholders, the industry, we need to work together to design an enabling framework that ensures fairness, sustainability, and innovation to have the digital future that we deserve. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Laura. Shahid?
Yeah,
in few seconds.
Yeah, I'll try my best. So, it's easy to blame the big tech, but I think telecom industry and telecoms themselves need to look at themselves and say, how do you become more innovative, provide services that consumers actually want? You talked about WhatsApp. Why didn't telecom companies come up with an over-the-top app like that? But I think that's something telecoms have to do themselves, look inward and figure out What are the compelling services they can offer in the future? They've missed the boat in several fronts. Cloud, even mobile apps, and now AI. I think there's a big opportunity for them to capitalize.
Dennis?
We have all those things in the developing world, so we didn't miss any beat at all. The beat we missed was that the regulators missed the beat, that they didn't regulate the OTTs and make them on a level footing. So one is unregulated, one is totally and overly regulated. I can see the future though, and I'm enthusiastic because the debate is alive and it's red hot now, and people realize that change has to come. So I think the industry is doing a good job in coming together, and hopefully the GSMA now will propel and even get more enthusiastic with the help of Ben and other people.
Ben, you are the chair of the GSMA group.
So I would say from
one word.
Yeah, it's just the three principles: more optimization, less regulation, and a fair price for traffic services. And a Europe-specific point: let's stop cutting ourselves up into pieces and let's get the strength of the single market and scale. And that's how we're going to get the European digital superhighways built.
Ladies and gentlemen, my takeaways from this discussion very quickly: the digital economy cannot strive and function without sustainable infrastructure. The investment must keep pace with the demand, which is skyrocketing. We've heard our colleagues, a balanced model is needed that would be based on partnership, public-private collaboration, that will be based on policy reform, and Dennis was mentioning about having a level playing field. And looking ahead, this discussion will continue to shape the digital policies, and the road to sustainable, inclusive, and innovation-friendly model is still being debated. So the discussion should not stop here. We have to be mindful about many fundamentals in the digital economy. The connectivity is the foundation of the digital economy, and without sustainable investment, someone has to pay for it. Innovation will stall, and all digital divides will be much more deepened. And let me remind to everyone that the internet was built on the principle of openness and collaboration. The question is, can we extend and apply these principles to the investment model that ensure the sustainability, predictability of the future? I'd like you to join me to give a round of applause to our speakers, and thank you very much for your indulgence.